Good evening, Council. Welcome to our study session this evening. We have a couple of agenda items where we're looking forward. One is on economic resiliency, and then taking a look at what I'll affectionately refer to as our top 10 discussion. And with that, first we're talking about economic resiliency, or resiliency, and I'll turn it over to the City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. So I wanted to give a little bit of context before I give it to Rekha, who will provide the next level of context. So in the last year, maybe 2 years, there has been a lot of conversation out in the municipal world, and I'm sure you guys have seen it, about community resiliency. And most of that conversation has been around the built environment. You have floods, you have fires, you have some physical disaster, natural disaster, physical disaster. And I think as governments, we do a very good job. We've spent a lot of time and energy in that arena, and so was not overly concerned for Littleton in that arena. And the mayor and I had been talking about it over the last, now going on 2 years. And so really where, and obviously when Councilmember Brinkman was mayor, she was pushing economic development and sustainability and those types of things. So the conversation had been ongoing in the economic world. And so when you really parsed down community resiliency relative to us, felt like it was in the economic world. And so not, again, in this kind of natural disaster area. So I talked to Denise Stevens, who unfortunately is not able to be here with us this evening, so Rekha's going to stand in. But I tasked them with putting together a economic resiliency plan, if you will. And so with that, that's where this came to be, out of resiliency in the larger context of the word, and we're focusing it for Littleton in the economic realm. So Rekha, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Sure. Well, we ended up expanding into the work from our department, also into community development and finance. And all three of us realized that we needed a little bit of help in understanding this very complex and frankly kind of difficult issue to try to put some things together around it. And so we hired Tom Turmack, who is here with us tonight, and he is the founder and director of the Scenario Planning Institute at Colorado State University. And Tom has been involved in a process called scenario planning. It's a version of strategic planning, but it is particularly focused on, and correct me if I'm misrepresenting anything, Tom, but it's particularly focused on tackling difficult problems where there are no apparent answers, no apparent single answers to difficult issues. So Tom has worked with a lot of organizations to help them create decision-making processes around difficult issues, and we felt like he was a great match for helping us understand economic resiliency for Littleton over the next 10 years. And so Tom's going to describe the process that he led and the report that came from that.
Okay, thank you. First, let me say thank you to all of you. Many of you I've spoken with over the last few months, and many of you attended some of our work. So it's nice to see it kind of come to a point where we say, now, what do we do next? So thank you for that. Let me just say just a couple other things about me. And I'm not texting, I am remote controlling with my phone here, so just so you know. So I'm a professor at CSU. I direct the Scenario Institute. I do research. I do consulting. So I have a pretty eclectic set of activities. And I love what I do. Absolutely love it. Because I love it so much, I have prepared a 4-hour presentation for you tonight, just for you. Sense of humor. Okay. So I do a lot of these different things.
No, they just know we have a big hook.
You can use it at any time, okay? So how did I get interested in scenarios? Scenarios were a perfect blend of analytic thinking and creative thinking. You have these stories going on, which I'm sure if you read them, they're not always easy to grapple with. But the whole point I'm gonna show you over the next 4 hours. Just kidding. So let me then just take you through. I want to describe what scenarios are, how it's useful, but I have seen this process help companies with their resilience. I have seen it help companies be able to maneuver out of situations that were particularly challenging. So this is what I'd like to do tonight. I'll tell you a little bit about when and why would you ever use scenarios. What are the outcomes? What are the benefits? What do you get? And we have research that shows this. I'm going to tell you one of my favorite stories, and then I'm going to take you through the work we did with the City of Littleton and the participants that joined us. Right at the beginning of that, we'll say a little bit more about the specific focus on economic resilience for this project, and then we'll have questions and answers at the end. I will have these stopping points throughout where we can pause and if you have questions. So maybe I could ask you not to jump in, anytime, but I will have breaks for us to deal with any questions. So let's start with the initial primary purpose of using scenarios at all, and it is this. Pierre Vac was a Shell oil executive who started this process. And in Shell, this is back in the 60s, he realized that there were things going on in the Middle East that nobody was thinking about. And that's where this process came from. His primary concern was to change people's mental models, to change the way people saw the possibilities, and try to help people collaboratively build a new mental model, a shared mental model. And that's how it reaches into community development and community action in processes like we did with the city. So it's a very engaging process, and I'll say more about that as we move along here. I'm going to switch to the arrows because they're faster. Okay, what are scenarios? First thing that I want to just be really clear about is that scenarios are not just a simple variable moving up or down. You don't just take oil price and say, well, oil price skyrockets or oil price tanks. That's not a scenario. Scenarios are much more complex than that. So the process I'm going to show you will reveal how we take 5, 6, 7, 8 critical variables like economics, politics, community development, social values, how all of these things come together to create a scenario. So that's what I mean by scenario. My wife uses the word scenario for anything. This scenario, that's the scenario. And I always have to correct her and say, no, much more complicated. And it's all about the dynamics that drive the system. And the way we're going to talk about scenarios today, I know a lot of scenario planning consultants. Their job is to create these stories. And over my career, I've learned that if all you get is the set of stories, you haven't done anything. So connecting to the decisions and the options is what leads us to talk about resiliency. You have to be able to do something differently, not just read an interesting story. Okay. Another really important thing is to talk about forecasts. A lot of planning is based on forecasts, and forecasts are right 80% of the time. And that's why they're so dangerous, is because year 1, year 2, year 3, the forecast is pretty much right on. But it's year 4 or 5 where things go absolutely the other direction and can catch people off guard. So scenarios, in essence, ask, what happens if the forecasts are absolutely wrong? And that's another way we can talk about resilience, is to be prepared for if the experts are saying, this is going to happen, we say, well, how do we know that, and what if they're wrong? Okay. The other part of scenarios is to open up this area where we don't know what we don't know. So we can kind of classify the world into 3 categories, and this comes from Don Rumsfeld back in the day. We have the things we know, the things we don't know, and the things we don't know we don't know. We're not even thinking about these possibilities. So the whole purpose of scenarios is to shrink this largest area, which is the things we just have no idea, to try to illuminate, to try to expand the way we think about what could happen. Okay? Okay. Brief history of scenarios. As I mentioned, it came from Shell Oil in the 60s and 70s. The environment just started to change much more rapidly. Big fluctuations have huge consequences, and people started to need a tool to think a little bit differently. So scenarios, there were some really big success stories, and it's kind of taken off from there. And mostly been used in kind of the corporate planning domain, but it's now creeping into everywhere. National national level planning, some countries are using scenarios at the national level to explore how is our nation going to be more resilient, be more economically driven. So 40 years of history, and there's a lot of evidence that scenarios have really helped a lot of different organizations. I could give all you that evidence to you if you want. Well, that's the 4-hour version. So here's the early success story, and this is an important illustration. This was the forecast for oil demand up to 1978. And if you can see that chart, there's that light gray shaded area, and the top edge of that shaded area was the best case forecast. The bottom edge was the worst case forecast. And the dotted line, they figured, well, let's just split the difference and say, we know our oil demand is going to be somewhere in that arena. Now, our friend Pierre at Shell was thinking about scenarios, and he was thinking about OPEC in the Middle East and things that were emerging, and he led their team through a different kind of planning process so that when this happened, they were prepared. So the demand went far below where anyone thought, but they had scenarios that actually went all the way down to 25 million barrels a day in demand. So they were thinking about how could it be that something could happen that we today would just say that would never happen. So they were playing with these ideas then, and because they had been able to think about that, their ability to react faster than their competitors was what allowed them to move up the chain in terms of the oil companies. And so this is another way scenarios enhance resilience. It allows you to react faster because you've already thought about the things that people say are impossible or that they say that will never happen. So thinking through the thought exercise is pretty important. A couple more overview slides. This is a typical strategic planning model, and I think it's important to illustrate the basic difference. Most strategic planning, I'm sure you've all done strategic planning. Here's where we are now. Here's where we would like to be in the future. And all we have to do is figure out the steps to get us from here to there. What is the problem with this way of thinking?
Totally linear. It assumes no variation.
This straight line is like tomorrow's the same as today, tomorrow's the same as today, tomorrow's the same as today. Nothing's changing. So if you make your plans based on this, and in the story I have in a little bit will illustrate that beautifully, you have a real high risk of being absolutely blindsided. So scenarios instead say, first thing, let's forget that we think we can know the future. It's absolutely unpredictable. So if we can admit that, then we come back to the present and say, well, how could it be? It could evolve in several different ways based on things that might happen. So if we had a plan that allowed us to react, to move ahead, to be strategic in a range of futures or scenarios, now we've got something that's a little bit more robust, a little bit more resilient, a little bit more flexible that will allow us to adapt. That's the point. Okay. Benefits. As I said, I'm a researcher, so I have refereed journal articles and research in all the companies and organizations that I've worked with over the years that show us we get a lot of benefits. We get resilience. We've just finished a study on individual resilience and how participants in this process report being able to react faster, able to rebound from adversity faster as a result of the scenario process. Preparation for uncertainty, dialogue, engagement. I mean, we had a really diverse set of participants, and they did not see the world the same way in this project. But we were able to have some really compelling conversations from my point of view, and I think we could ask some of those folks as well. So there's a lot of benefits of scenarios that's been documented in the research literature. Okay, one more story, and then we can take a pause for any questions you might have. Do you recognize this? Does anyone recognize this? Okay. It's a map of the United States. Does it look funny? What looks funny? The earthquake. California is an island. Now you're saying, is this a map of the past or a map of the future? When I tell this story in California, people don't like it so much. This is a real map from the year 1611, and this is a true story. So I'm going to tell you how this map came to be. Early explorers around the Baja Peninsula of California drew that part of the map. Later expeditions into Seattle, Puget Sound, they drew that part of the map. So back in England, they put the maps together, they connect the dots, and they say, voila, we have an island of California. True story. Now, there was no problem with this until the missionaries decided they were going to use this map to bring the Christian religion to North America. So, they made a plan based on this map. And here was their plan. They built boats that they could take apart, and they brought with them hundreds of mules. So here was their plan. We're going to sail up to the coast, take the boats apart, pack them on the mules, march them across the island, put them back together, and sail the rest of the way in. Anyone want to take a guess at the end of the story?
It up in New Mexico.
Boat parts and mules in Las Vegas. So they never, they made a plan based on, a map of the terrain, and it turned out to be, pretty challenging. So if your map is wrong, you often do the wrong thing. And there's a lot of different insights that we can learn from that story. Let me just give you a couple of them. It took 50 years to change this map. So back in England, there were survivors of this mess. They had this debate that raged on for 50 years. They said, your map is wrong. And then they said, no, you're just in the wrong place. You're not using it properly. So the point is that it's really hard to change these assumptions about the world. The next important point is that every single one of us has a map in our head. It's called our mental model. And it's how we make decisions. It's built of your experience, your success, your failure, your education, your culture, your religion. Everything that you've learned in your life creates your map, and it's how you function. So, does any one of us have a perfectly accurate map of reality? No. We all have islands of California. We all have places in the world where we're making assumptions that may or may not be true. But isn't it interesting, if you look closely here, we've got a couple islands here. Let's draw some rivers going in. No one had ever been here, and they're just making up this detail. So what they do is they go over here and they say, well, it probably looks like this, with rivers and islands. So you just fill in based on what you do know. And we do this all the time. It's the only way we can function. But the point of scenarios, one of the points, is to recognize that we all have these maps. It guides how we act, how we make decisions. And what if we had a way for all of us to put our maps out on the table and try to build a more accurate map built out of all of our experiences, beliefs, biases, this kind of thing. So that's one of the things. One of the questions that we essentially asked was, where is the island of California for the city of Littleton in thinking about economic resilience? So I love that story, and I'll give you this chart if you want to tell it to all of your friends and everyone you know. This is a good point to stop if you have any questions. Otherwise, I'll just keep moving along. Okay. Let me just brief you on the process to show you what we did. We started with a question. We have to have a thing to build scenarios about. In this case, it was, how could the city of Littleton evolve and change over the next 10 years? Very broad, general question. And we wanted it to be broad. We wanted it to set a context to think about what decisions do city officials and citizens need to come to some agreement on. These are some examples, but we need a question. The next part is we had 30 people in here with Post-it notes, and we had this paper taped up on the wall, and everyone was throwing all these ideas up there. What's everything that I can think of that will have an impact on Littleton's evolution and change in the next 10 years? So we filled this wall with Post-it notes. We went through a categorization and ranking process. So we had to then consolidate those and put them in order on impact. So what's going to have the highest impact on how Littleton changes over the next 10 years? And what happens is that people start to kind of argue a little bit about, well, no, this is higher than this. No, this is higher than this. And that debate, that is the map sharing, that is the island of California stuff going on, that is people putting their assumptions, their biases out on the table. So all of this activity is a driver of dialogue, which is what makes this process work. So we spent about an hour and a half working that out. Then we went vertically. ranking things on uncertainty. So how uncertain are these factors? Do we know how they're going to behave in the next 10 years? Things like healthcare costs. Not very uncertain. I mean, we know the costs of healthcare are going to continue to increase. Population demographics, some uncertainty there. But things like technology, highly uncertain. You see? So when we were finished, we had this nice spread of these sticky notes and a lot of good conversation and debate, and it was wonderful. Now, in scenarios, the next step is you choose different combinations of these high impact, high uncertainty items. We call these the critical uncertainties in my world, because they're the things that could change the city in this case, and we have no idea how they're going to behave. So we play around with different combinations of those factors, and we put them on another matrix. So we take one factor and we stretch it, and we take another factor and we stretch it. And for Littleton, that was this. We kind of tilted it just because aesthetically it was fun and it's surprising. But the two axes we chose were the commercial development. What does the commercial development of Littleton look like? On the one end, we have typical franchise, big box, that kind of thing. On the other hand, we have unique, boutique, mom and pop kind of development. The other axis was housing. What kind of housing development happens in Littleton in the next 10 years? Is it higher density? Is it shared? Is it multifamily? Or does it remain kind of single-family homes, private residence? Two different ways the housing could evolve. And so what happens is by combining these two, we get these four different scenarios. So for example, with a higher density, shared, multiple family housing situation and a typical or franchise commercial development, that gives us the Aspen scenario over here. The opposite of that is going to be the unique, maybe innovative companies, small businesses starting up with single-family housing. Kind of the housing stays similar to how it is now. That's the Magnolia scenario. You see how the two forces combining to create the four scenarios. Does that make sense? Okay. So the next step was to say, like I mentioned earlier, many scenario planners that I know, this is kind of their end point. And I think you would agree that that might be disappointing if we did all this work and said, here's some cool stories with tree names. So the next step is, how do we connect that to usability, to implementation, to what do we do now? So how do we use them? We generate options, we test them in the scenarios, and we look at what people say. Pretty straightforward. In this case, we used a ranking on risk and return, but before I get too far down there, let me just show you exactly what we were dealing with. And let's back up and look at, again, the core purpose of this project was focusing on the economic resilience of Littleton. So we know, as you heard, there are aspects of the city that require some attention, and there isn't bountiful, plentiful resources everywhere to keep everything fixed and the roads looking perfect. But there's a history of strong community participation in Littleton. People want to have involvement here, and it's wonderful. And it seems, at least what I saw in the workshops that I was working on, people were really willing to have the debates and the dialogue. So that was great. This particular project was led, I worked very closely with Rekha and with Denise, who unfortunately couldn't be here. But the Office of Economic Development was kind of driving this in partnership with some city officials. And we invited participants based on capturing a range of viewpoints, a range of ages. We wanted and we needed a diverse group of people. Now, to be fully honest, I left a lot of that to Denise and Rekha because I don't know the citizens, but I know we all worked very hard to get a vocal and challenging and diverse set of participants. Did it perfectly reflect the city? No. But I have some thoughts later on about how we could, you can keep using this. This scenario project is just the start of the conversation. Okay, so that as a framer, here's a list of everyone who participated. And then I interviewed about 6 core critical people, leadership positions and different points of view. All this came together in the matrix that you saw. We did all the ranking with the sticky notes. And then, As I said before, the question was, how do we connect it to decisions? So, as you might imagine, the decisions were very much catering to the economic resilience of the city. So, decision number one was around increasing sales tax revenues. Decision one, there were 4 options we were dealing with there. Attract big box retailers to Littleton. That would immediately give a big spike in sales tax revenue. Option 2, create a sin tax for these kinds of products. And we looked at some examples of some different cities and how they're doing that kind of thing. Allow for sale of marijuana and put a city tax on that, and maybe an additional city tax. Portland has a 20% sales tax on marijuana. And finally, a plastic bag tax. Those were ways of increasing sales tax revenues. Okay? The second decision was new taxes. What new taxes could we bring on the table? So one is a hotel room tax. Where I live, Fort Collins, we have a 3% tax on lodging. And we looked into that a little bit, and actually all the surrounding areas of Littleton have a hotel room tax. So Littleton is this island, the only city we could find around Denver that doesn't charge a hotel room tax. Cell phone data services tax. We got down the road, and in the workshop we were informed that, in fact, that already exists in Littleton. So you'll see that's omitted in the book, and there's a note in there for that. Introduce a business income tax. That was another one. A carbon tax. This was really debatable, a carbon tax, because there aren't a lot of examples. But British Columbia has been doing this for a while, and it's really amazing how they've reduced the carbon output of the city. So, something to consider. And then a local option tax. And we have some examples of all of these that are contained in the report and some links that you can go to learn more about. Third decision just had 2 options, but it was encourage density. And 2 ways: increase land use density to increase property tax revenue, meaning bringing more people to Littleton. And 2, establishing an infrastructure trust. I had never heard of that before, but Chicago has this infrastructure trust where people pay in, and it's dedicated to infrastructure projects, a bridge or a road redevelopment or something like that. And we couldn't find really too much downside to that. It seemed like, I had never heard of it. Many of the participants hadn't heard of it, and it had a lot of promise, so we looked at that. So those were 3 decisions and the options underneath each of them. Okay? Next, we gave each participant in the workshop a worksheet to rank all of those options on their perceived benefit and risk. And here's the catch. In the scenario. So we actually did it 4 times. So we gave everybody a worksheet for all of those options and said, okay, in the aspen tree scenario, what is your assessment of benefit and risk of each of these options? We did that. We had a brilliant conversation, again, continuing that dialogue about the island of California and debate and different ways of seeing it. Done with the aspen scenario, moved to the magnolia scenario. We repeated the process again. Everybody ranked it. Thinking mental frame was, we tried to get everybody framed into the magnolia scenario. Did the same thing. And again with the apple tree and again with the pine tree. So it was a repetitive process. We spent the whole day. People were tired, but they said, can we please stay later and keep working on this? That was a joke. So then we took all of that information and then we plotted it. So here's the plot on the aspen tree scenario. We've got, it's a little cut off. We've got risk on the vertical side and we've got benefit over here. Now, the logical way to look at this is to say, well, things that are high benefit, relatively low risk, wow, we should really take a look at some of these things. The other way you can use this is what are the low benefit, high risk things? So we should definitely not do some of those things. So anyhow. So this is the plot for the aspen tree scenario. And if we pull out, the 4 or so things, again, under the dynamics of the aspen tree, these options seemed like good ideas. A hotel room tax, attract some chain retailers, marijuana sales tax, and an infrastructure trust. These were the 4 robust options in the aspen tree scenario. And you have all this in the book. Here's the plot for the magnolia tree. Pretty similar. four options, they're the same. Hotel room tax, attract a retailer. Marijuana sales tax, infrastructure trust. Same four we had in the Aspen scenario. So now what we're doing is building, like these are good options, seemingly, in two scenarios. Okay? We do it again with the apple tree scenario. A little different plotting. Here, land use density was the one that switched, but we have building robustness for the other three. Finally, the pine tree scenario. And notice in all of these, business income tax is a high-risk activity and not a lot of benefit. This is the other thing that came out. It's in the report. In the final recommendations, we actually say don't do a business income tax because you're trying to grow, you're trying to get people to start businesses here in Littleton. So anyway, something not to do and some things to really think about doing. So again, the same four in the pine tree. And then what we do is we can average it across the whole set of four scenarios. So when we do the math and we average them, now there's some problems with averaging. We'll talk about that in just a minute. We get the same four. So based on that exercise, based on the group of people that came to participate and laid out their views and their mental models about those options and those scenarios, these four things rose to the top. Now, I don't want anyone to interpret this as saying you should just go do these things. But what this says to me is these are four things worth studying in a little more detail that could have a pretty high impact on Littleton's economic resilience. So things like, marijuana sales tax. What's the right rate of tax? We had 20% in Portland. Maybe that would create problems if you go 20% here. So some study about what the ranges are. Learning more about an infrastructure trust. How does it work? The only downside we could brainstorm in that session was if it were abused or if it were, whoever was managing it was acting unethically. Big box store, I don't know if there's any looming opportunities. I know there's a history in Littleton with one that did not pass some years ago, but it's worth considering for the economic resilience of the city. And then the hotel room tax seemed like almost a no-brainer, given the surrounding communities all have it, and maybe it's something that should be considered. Okay. Just a couple final points. So that's the major set of recommendations, is to really entertain these four options for the economic resilience of the city. The next thing to really think about, and it's not, it's a little harder to decipher in your book, so I wanted to spend at least a couple minutes talking about it, is this thing we call signals. Now, signals are the events that are required for one of these scenarios to come true. And we spent some time looking at the news reports and all that, coming up with, listing out what are the things that need to happen for the apple tree scenario to become reality. And I know it's small type, but we list them in there. And what that means is, okay, now, let me tell you just a quick story. I was working for a space rocket company. And one of their rockets, they were getting their engines from Russia. And one of the signals of one of the scenarios was tensions with Russia, such that the U.S.-Russia relationship strained, and they can't get their rocket engines anymore. 6 months later, the Snowden thing happened, and Obama canceled his summit to Russia, and the company couldn't get their engines for their rocket. So the signals give you a direct feedback loop to the environment. So you're watching the news in the morning and you see this. And I guarantee some of these signals will pop up in the next 6 to 12 months for the city of Littleton. You'll see some of these things start to happen. The idea is that in 6 to 12 months, if we start to see 3 or 4 of these things happening, we might be headed into the apple tree scenario. And the beauty of it is that in that options testing, we already figured out what the best options in the apple tree scenario were. So if we need to adjust, we've kind of got it right there, ready to go. And you've got those in your book too, but I just pulled one example. So here are the signals for the aspen tree, and here were the options that seemed the most robust. Now, this city case was a little bit interesting to me because there was so much congruence or convergence on what were the good options across all the scenarios. But I wanted to just demonstrate how the signals can work. If we see these things happening, we know that these are potentially good things to do. So we've whittled down that list of 12 options to 4. So that's the reaction piece of this project. So that's the bulk of what I wanted to do, but I do think since working with Littleton, we're doing scenarios with the Larimer County Food Bank up in Fort Collins. We've done a project with the city of Fort Collins, and Loveland is approaching us looking for. So I think the application to city planning, people are starting to see that this is a potentially really useful tool. But I wanted to point out a few ways where it just really shines in engaging citizens. Now, did everyone get to participate who wanted to? No. Did we have multiple sessions that enabled more people to attend? No. But we could certainly do focus groups and connect with different populations that maybe weren't able to be with us in this project. But we could apply scenarios to certain community revitalization projects. I know there's a lot of those potential projects. There's an area that needs redevelopment. What do we do? Scenarios could be useful if it's uncertain. Application to technology efforts, new infrastructure. And I would just say again, any issue that's complex and uncertain, you can use scenarios. And I'm not saying you have to go through the rigorous process that we used, but we can certainly help think about, the whole point is to think about decisions in multiple futures rather than just assuming that tomorrow will be just like today, because we know it won't. So that's what I wanted to go through tonight, and I hope I kind of hit my time. It's a good point to gauge your reactions and answer any questions that you might have and continue the dialogue. As I said, the scenarios are just a start, and now the hard work begins of keeping things moving in terms of what people want to do.
Questions or comments, Council? Bill?
Tom, you had a lot of this seems to address uncontrollables, external forces.
Yep.
Which is, external obsolescence and that type of thing that impact the city. Can you address the impact of how you control your controllables, which is a lot of what we can do as a council or as a staff? Is how does our reaction in terms of maintaining infrastructure or making sure that we're properly nourishing corridor plans or downtowns or shopping centers or whatever it may be?
Right. That's a great question, and you're right where I hoped you would be, is because eventually you realize that, decisions we make are going to change these futures too. So I would say using this kind of process, and not that you have to do the ranking, but so think about corridor. What are the different options you have? And then say, what's the best way to do that in apple tree versus magnolia? So to continue using that kind of testing of the options that you do have. So another way to say it is the scenarios are necessarily external because they're the environment in which you're operating. And the decisions you have will affect that. So I would say the decisions are the way you capture your controllables in the set of scenarios which are the uncontrollables. Have I answered your question?
Sort of.
I think keep going with examining what we could do. Keep testing it. That's the idea.
Bruce?
I really like what you've done because I've worked with emergency planning and military, and those are scenario-based planning a lot.
Yep.
But what if I look at this 6 months from now and I say, wow, I see that apple and pine are converging, or I see things occurring, changes, that they're no longer the clearly defined 4 choices. There's convergence. Tell me what happens next.
Well, I should prepare you. It's never going to be the clear wedge, so you're going to get some signals from this one and one from over here. So it's just it's kind of like a radar to give you a feel of where you are, but it's never going to hit it specifically. I think you're looking for, the picking up of a lot of the same signals in a given scenario tells you that the world is evolving in a way that we have thought about. So you adjust from there.
So if we were looking at someone with your ability to facilitate that, is that one of those points where you say, maybe you need to go back and relook so that you're still within a range, but maybe even the ranges are changing a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. the time to revisit is right here. When these two variables, the commercial and the housing, remember we said those were the critical uncertainties. High impact could change the city and entirely unpredictable, really uncertain. When there are other things that may be more uncertain and impactful. In other words, when these aren't so important anymore, then it's time to kind of revisit that process. And when you get those critical variables, so I think those will be with you for a while. But the question is, are there other things that may emerge that may be more uncertain and have a higher possible impact on the city? Yeah.
Bruce?
I agree with my namesake here. It's very good work. I've had a lot of exposure to this kind of stuff using different tools, but I mean the orientation is always to improve decision making by looking at the range of possibilities as opposed to focusing on your base case, which is always wrong. Right. But when you guys came down to, for example, the 4 high-graded outcomes, just for example, the marijuana sales tax one is interesting because, I mean, we've talked about that extensively. And I think there's an acknowledgement that certainly there would be incremental revenue available from an economic resiliency standpoint, but what council's always struggled with is the issue of what are sort of the unintended consequences and the costs associated with the incremental revenue, because it's not a free lunch. And putting it up there is, I guess the question maybe goes to high reward, but is it really a low risk proposition, and how do you gauge that?
Right. Well, and that is it is not a perfect process, and there is the averaging. A lot of people might have rated it a 1 on risk, and maybe lots of people made it a 10, and then we get a 5, you know what I mean? So there is the problem with averaging, regression to the mean. So I think that's why I think the most important next step is to really study and debate some of these things, because different people in different positions are going to have more or less information about these things. So yes, unintended consequences, which is why I said, you don't just blindly go and do some of these things. It's now about, we really maybe need to look at them because they seem like factors that would contribute to the economic resilience, but are we overlooking the cost of implementing some of these? So that's the next phase, is really to push on all of that and figure out, should it be a 5% tax or a 10% or Portland 20 or more?
That's a quick follow-on.
Please.
The other question ends up being is, how have you seen organizations you've worked with assimilate this into their culture? I mean, doing it as a one-off project is interesting, but the ones that have been successful at it, how did they approach it from the standpoint of making it sort of table stakes to any decision-making process?
2 things. When leaders require it as a way to, so in companies I've seen, if managers have to justify their actions, their budgets, their decisions based on a set of scenarios because their leaders require it, that's one way to fail-safe get it institutionalized. The other thing that I say to every client and group I work with is, if you let it kind of be the one-off, then it will be. And the one easy way to keep it alive is review those signals, spend 15 minutes on them once a month. Or I don't know how often you have your meetings, but first thing on the agenda, look at the signals. What are we seeing? Are we seeing anything? Yes? No? Okay, forget it. Move on. In 6 months, it might be a different conversation. You say, there's really some things happening here, and now we're starting to get a read on the future. So those are two quick suggestions. Without leadership support, this kind of process doesn't go anywhere. And then the decision to make it part of a meeting, and it doesn't have to be 2 hours. It can be, like I said, 15 minutes to just keep it on the map, so to speak.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So another question, kind of a follow-on on what Bill was talking about, which is there are things that you can control. There are things that you can influence, and then there's things that just happen.
Yep.
In some of this, there's the highest risk items are those things that just happen externally, that you just have to keep your finger on the pulse in dealing with those. Can you comment a little bit, because you're kind of using the mean of folks and their responses on some of this, but your sense on the group, the magnitude of some of these to actually address different issues. How did that come into play? Because you have kind of a solid 4 that come out, but did folks have a sense of what's the magnitude for some of those other than it's incremental?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so hotel room tax is a low magnitude. I mean, we had that discussion, but it just kind of seems like a no-brainer because everyone else is doing it. But yeah, it's not gonna change the face of the city in terms of a windfall to do all kinds of cool things with. But I think, a big box store is a different story. Yeah. I mean, so yeah, we did have some conversation about magnitude. I didn't detail that in the report because I think it's, in some ways, probably far more subjective than I wanted to take a crack at explaining. But yes, there would be.
There's 2 of those I could say, hey, those are worth looking at. The other 2,
Yep. But every little bit helps in some ways too.
I understand some of that. Yeah. And then with those, any one of these directions has a potential impact on what might be perceived quality of life.
Sure.
How did the group kind of evaluate those, since there's kind of this coalescence among those 4?
Yeah, there was less conversation about that, and the reason why is that this is the first time they're seeing the results. So that at the end of that day, we had collected all this information and then started working on the report. So there wasn't a direct way to feed that back until now, but I think that's the conversation that would be next is, what are the major problems, getting clear and some agreement on that, and then how do they affect quality of life? And it's going to be different for different people based on what they're doing. The interesting thing for me working in the city was the magnitude of the simple fact that not everyone is going to agree. Like that happens in the companies I work with, but the magnitude is much larger with the city because, we're all, different ages, different backgrounds. We're in different jobs, different industries. So that is pronounced in the city, and that's been a big learning point for me. But I would say that's the next step, is to, we did notice too that the one demographic that was missing from our activities was kind of the younger generation. We had some folks with us, but young families, we didn't have anyone from that kind of range or that kind of domain of the population. So we did talk about ways to keep it alive, maybe doing some focus groups with other segments of the population, seeing how other people react. Because the sample was, probably not enough to go and make policy, but to say these might be worth exploring.
Council, additional questions? No. Tom, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
And so while he packs up his things, why don't we take a 5-minute break? Okay, council, now we have a set of answers. Now we're going to get to work on the questions, so to speak. One of the things that, as we're going to have this discussion, we have some opportunity as we go through some of the budget discussions and beyond to influence where we may go in some of this with regard our questions. What I've done is kind of coalesce some of what came out of the top 10 inputs into some categories. You may not agree with some of the categories, but it was to help facilitate some of the discussions by grouping some of them together so that we can kind of facilitate some of this. And to build upon some of the training that we've had, this is some of our opportunity to state the question, as Hans would say, around some of these, so that as we're moving forward with regard thinking about possibilities of solutions, we're first looking for that consensus around the problem statement that's there. So I know I may have spoken slightly in Greek with that, but did everyone kind of grasp what I said? Okay. And so we have
leaning more on the kind of.
the kind of. Okay. Well, you can lean on the kind of. We actually had one member of our group with his submissions took the effort, Mr. Hopping, to come back and not only identify his top 10, but actually do a problem statement associated with each of those. So.
And the rest of us look bad.
Gold star.
Not that I wanted to single out anyone around that. So, but what I'd like to do is have us have some discussion whether we actually identify an exact problem statement or not. Wanted to say that, at least from my perspective, it was helpful to the staff in this to actually have some of our free-form submissions be an input to them to know what some of our thinking was, absent dialogue and discussion. So as we go through, if we're able to kind of coalesce around a problem statement, remembering that from some of our training, what we're talking about is in the context of quality of life being impacted, that will be a good thing that's there. So the first one is taking a look at the downtown area, particularly, and so it says redevelop opportunities in the downtown, create a bid, and if any of those folks don't understand that, we can certainly have folks around the table that can explain it. Main Street zone for retail only on the street level, tighter design guidelines for Main Street, increased height limits as distance from Main Street, so the setback of items. Possibly have a circulator bus for downtown, improve the linkage from the light rail to downtown, improved inviting entrances to downtown, looking at particularly the Santa Fe and Bowles, the west entrance, redevelop properties around North Prince entrance into downtown Littleton. What I'd like to do is kind of open it up for folks. Hopefully some people recognize their words because I very much tried not to change some of your words content. It may be a shortened statement, but talk about some of those. And so I'll open it up for folks to kind of comment on that.
I think one thing that has happened in downtown is we look at it, there's a diversity of zoning downtown, and really when we look at downtown, it is one seamless area from the Carnegie Library, the melting pot, up through the courthouse. And we have a lot of plans that have been put into place. We have downtown design guidelines, we have corridor plans and such, and there needs to be a way to bring those together in a coherent way that has some teeth to it. For example, we just went through the Grove thing, and that's out now, so we can talk about it, but we have the Littleton Boulevard corridor plan that had no teeth. So when people when someone looks at an ordinance, there may be a modifying part of that, such as a corridor plan or set in downtown, the downtown design guidelines, that have more of a cultural statement than the ordinance does. So someone can come in and just obey the ordinance. It may not have that cultural context. The way we could do that is to incorporate design guidelines or corridor plans into the ordinances, and that could affect things like retail only on the street level. Right now what we have is voids caused by office space that's on Main Street, and you have shoppers walking along with bags, and there are 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 foot pieces that are not a shopping area, and that's what they come here for. They don't come down to look in windows and watch people work, although in some pieces, sometimes that might be a treat, but some kind of a cohesive plan to do that. And what I put as a problem statement is occupation in the non-retail space on Main Street reduces the number and diversity of retail opportunities, which reduces customer appeal and creates on-street voids. So that's the kind of thing that I'd like to see us address in terms of incorporating the we've had a lot of good work done by boards and commissions that we haven't given teeth to in order to keep the cultural piece of Littleton as we develop the economic picture over time. So that's kind of where I was trying to head with this in the downtown area. Does that make any sense to people?
I think part of the problem statement is the lack of a cohesive vision. It's just never been one. It's just happened.
I disagree with you totally.
Do you? Because I can tell you that I don't see whether we're developing a fine arts district, are we developing a retail location, are we developing a service industry and restaurant location? I don't know what we're doing there.
Well, best practices would indicate that we have an historic district that has a combination of retail and food and beverage and office or residential up. And that's a model that's worked very effectively in places all over the world. I mean, it's worked well in Rome. I mean, so, and it's worked well in places like Lodo and such where they don't have retail on the ground floor. And then the market becomes self-fulfilling because what happens when you have that contextual piece there, it attracts better quality investors over the long run that have deeper pockets, more vision, and the ability to attract retailers that are appropriate to the demographics that are in place. So we can't control the markets, but we can control the envelope, and that's what we want to try to do by the retail down, office or residential up, and consistent zoning that allows that envelope to come into place. And we can point to a lot of examples around. So it's not a fine arts district. It is a retail commercial district that is really the cultural and should be a retail hub of Littleton.
But we have people trying very hard to create a fine arts district. Got 12 art stores that have banded together on their own. They're talking about, and so what I'm saying is, and the fact that we created all the eating establishments really was based on the vision of one entrepreneur down there who forced that to happen on his own, really, against some other people's wishes. So, and I like that a homegrown, grassroots creation of that kind of environment is great, but I don't know what the role of the city is, because I just don't think we've said we have a document that says what we're trying to do down there. And so when you talk about creating a business improvement district, to do what? I don't even know what the vision is. I'm just being critical, but saying, if we're looking 15 years out or 10 years out, what do we really need? I think we need to have a better vision statement, and one that everybody down there created. I mean, it's not done in a closet here in the city center. But, so I like the idea, but I'm just talking about where do we fit in.
Bruce?
I think the redevelopment opportunities, actually, and I was going to say, I thought Bill's point, about sort of the design guidelines being part and parcel of the whole thing, I think he talked about. That's a good point, because I think we want ultimately to maintain the integrity of what's done in the built environment in that area. But the other thing we consistently struggle with, and you know, God knows different people in the community have wildly different interpretations of this, is the whole transit-oriented development. And you have to, if we're going to link retail, or if we're going to do redevelopment from a retail standpoint, which there's obviously a motivation to do from a sales tax generation perspective, we've also got to come to grips with the housing stock issues, which are further down on this thing. And how do we want to think about a plan for housing, whether it be more or less dense, more or less achievable? What was the word you used? Was it attainable? Attainable. Let's use attainable as opposed to affordable. But just in general, you know, that's a big issue. We've got a demographic that isn't generating a lot of sales tax revenue but needs services and is a key fabric to the community that we want to stay in the community. And at the same point in time, having demographic that will utilize Main Street and purchase services or products from the standpoint of generating incremental sales tax revenue is a key attribute to this whole thing as well. So, I mean, I think the void issue is, you know, I understand what you're talking about with the retail, you know, piece and having the non-retail on Main Street, which I agree with. I think we had we've talked about that for a while. That to me is a problem, but I think also it's how do we come to grips with the housing attributes around in the vicinity, and particularly with the football, that we have to noodle on as well.
Well, historically, downtown was a mix. I mean, horseshoeing places. I mean, it was a mix of all kinds of stuff. We have the Town Hall Arts Theater. We got restaurants. We've got business. You know, the professional businesses. I like the mix. Let the mix churn. If you know, I don't. Some of the business that goes, people shop and eat, do it because they've come for some other reason downtown. But while they're here, they decide to eat. They decide to go to the men's store. They decide to get their hair cut. Probably not on the spot for a haircut, most of them, but I like the churn. I don't particularly want to see the split level division there. I think it will take care of itself. So little place somebody fits into, then they fit into it, then they grow, and maybe they shrink, and then they move upstairs where it's cheaper or something. And I don't know if it's cheaper upstairs or not, but second floor. But I like the mix. I mean, we have fraternal organizations, street level, well, some double-decker. So I like the churn and the variety and the budding arts district and so forth.
From my perspective, I guess I wouldn't separate retail and arts, meaning the studio.
I didn't mean to. I misunderstood when he said fine arts what he was talking about, because I interpret fine arts as a different type of retail.
Right. And so I think it's okay to have a position that on Main Street, if we're talking about that encourages retail/restaurants being street level accessible. It's interesting because in Telluride they now have restaurants on second floors in Telluride as well. So it's because I guess in the basements as well. So it's kind of interesting to see what some of the other cities have done. But to be in a position where, not necessarily requiring, but certainly if we were looking to encourage use of space, those would be the ones getting to Stallman's comments about having to deal with housing. That's also part of downtown. And so you have your off Main Street And you have a couple of blocks. From my perspective, to the extent that we have it on Alamo, restaurants and the like, the continued development of the arts, the Arapahoe Community College Arts Center that's there, and seeing that open up would be kind of a nice thing to have happen. What I struggle with, and it's not something that we control, but it's actually in the last 2 weeks I've had 3 folks comment that they've come down for a particular shop and it's not open. That's the part that, if there was a business improvement district, I'm not sure if that would be its purpose, but trying to have folks have somewhat consistent hours so that shopping or retail experience and have that mesh a little bit better with the eat and shop kind of piece would be something that I'd love to see. Jerry?
And I think as Bruce Solomon, or Beckman was saying, good Bruce, that we don't have a plan. He's on the way out, who cares? So, but I'm okay with that too, because as Peggy was saying, it's just such a variety of folks. And whether they come down to look at the art, they end up having perhaps lunch, or they see, an olive oil store. I like having that. And I think as far as, is a store open or not, all you do is go on the web and just check their store hours. I've heard that before too, but they were closed. Well, I know when we go places, we often just look at the website. I mean, the information's out there. This isn't like it used to be. You go down and they're open at the mall till 9 o'clock. We're not talking that. We're talking about the small mom and pop type stores. In other communities where we always say how they try to develop a downtown like what we have, but they're doing it with more of the retail franchise type businesses. Ours is a very unique, one of a kind type stores. I like that variety, and I liked letting them make their own doggone decisions of whether or not they're going to be open on a Sunday afternoon past 4 o'clock or something like that. It's as simple as just going to a website and looking it up. And I've mentioned over the past that the BIAC, getting the BIAC, that's the Business Industry and Advisory Committee, I believe it is, going again. I know we have a merchants group down in Main Street, but they don't represent everybody down there. But we do need I think, to get BIAC going again so we can get input from all across the city, whether it be District 4, which there are businesses out there. But we need to get BIAC going so that we can get a full handle on this, not just what we think is going on. It's not just about Main Street anyway. Main Street is hugely important to all of this. But we have other business districts as well that many of these same things could apply to them as well.
I've got some notes. I don't know if other folks have. The opportunity here is what can the city possibly do to encourage all the storefronts and all the fronts to be vital businesses, and maybe lean towards a particular direction as we have folks come and ask questions about where they might locate their businesses. The aspect of attainable housing comes up as we see a little bit later for Councilmember Stallman. Did you take some notes or so? Okay.
So Phil, another issue is that we can't control. The more thriving downtown is, the higher the lease rates are going to be, and that will indirectly affect some people moving to a second floor or moving to a side street or whatever because of that cost. At least, but the market does that. So.
That's true. That's where a current merchant and the property owner's interests might not coincide. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'll take the create a bid as maybe an answer looking for a question that we'll come to later. And in this area, we have the TOD that impacts all of downtown yet to come up in the next year. So B is also related to a TOD plan, but comments were made on develop Ensor property, redesign Aspen Grove, parking garage or structure for the RTD mineral lot. There are two comments on that.
Well, clearly most of that is very much out of a lot of our control. It's private property. Looks like Ensor will develop as however the developer feels he needs to do in a by use by right. So that doesn't appear to be an option. It's unfortunate that we didn't have this discussion 4 years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago and could have realized a vision for what we felt would be a good use of probably one of our greatest land assets. As such, it will be what it will be based on what an out-of-state developer feels is necessary there. Redesigning Aspen Grove, that's always been something that's even something in speaking to the development company of Aspen Grove that they would be interested in. They're just not willing to put money into, they're more of a shopping center developer, so these what do they call it, lifestyle centers are not really the big part of their portfolio. I think they maybe have 3 or 4 of them in their world. And so we had what was that group? It wasn't, I want to say Trust for Public Land, but it wasn't. It was ULI. Who kind of did that study and showed us how it could be tweaked and why there are problems with it. I think they were almost looking at it, kind of trying to make it look more like a Belmar, or Belmar, I say it wrong all the time, Belmar. And I think that there's opportunities there. We've talked to RTD about how it backs up to the RTD station. We know that the RTD lot there is a huge, just a desert of cars most of the time, and could probably be, there'd be better ways to park. We are doing a TOD study on that, or that land use area, so hopefully we'll be able to have something come from that. I think the opportunity, it's real unfortunate that LL Bean wasn't able to locate at Aspen Grove, because that is in fact the exact type of retail that is unique, would be unique and personal to Littleton because of the proximity to the river, the opportunity to engage in river usage, and it's that's their retail psychology. So, I think just in many ways it's I think us being very pronounced about how our support of seeing that become a stronger marketplace, seeing what happens with the RTD lot. I would hope that there's opportunity on the Ensor property to have some level of input, but I'm not expecting that. Bless you.
And the general point for me on that whole area, particularly taking a look at what is the high cost of a parking structure, I think a parking structure makes a better use of the land opportunity within a TOD. But to be looking at if there's a bid or the equivalent for that area that's broad enough that would encompass Aspen Grove and Ensor to help be in some position to handle some of the costs of that would be a wonderful thing.
Well, I think we have to think about also that because we do have that light rail station, what we don't have is any residential for that light rail station. So we have a lot of shopping. We're going to put more shopping on the Ensor property. You go 4 miles down the street and you've got more shopping there at the Costco and the Target and all. So, at what point do we grab part of the market, or are we just kind of dragging a net trying to catch something? And to be more intentional about what we want to do over there and what we support, I guess.
To just emphasize a little bit of what Councilman Brinkman has said, the INSER property is living on, I think everyone's cognizant, a 1986 plan development approval from their annexation, and it's got on that zoning, it's got a fair amount of retail on it, and then it's got some more transit-oriented development on the north side of the property. And I think this conversation on this particular item, B, is relevant as you guys think about the station area plan that we're about to undertake and what types of components within that you would like to see. Additional housing, do we have enough commercial development? Do you want to focus on the housing? We are a parking lot right now. We're a destination from the south and we're a destination from the west. That's who parks in that RTD lot. It's a commuter parking lot. It's not our residents, and it certainly isn't being used by people coming to Littleton from the north. At some point, it will continue into Highlands Ranch and to the Lucent location, Lord knows when. So really focusing on the station area plan, which is the area that would be a public-private partnership with a developer, RTD, and so that is probably what you have the greatest amount of ability to affect. And then, we'll see what happens with INSER if there's any requests and if there's any ability to leverage that from a 1986 plan, which probably does not represent our views today, nor design that we would lay out today. So, some additional comments.
I would add, too, that in my time on the Planning Commission, we did talk about things about the private land, kind of what Debbie was talking about. I mean, I made a note of it. We talked about strip malls, about do we want strip malls here? Do we want shopping centers? Some of you may remember New Urbanism. Remember that? That was a fiasco going on for a while. We had all kinds of consultants telling us how wonderful that was. And then now we have the lifestyle centers, which I guess maybe they're not all cracked up to be. I don't know what they are. I kind of like them, but I know they have their issues too. They all have their lives. Whatever we sort of make a decision that that's what we're going to do, you can guarantee that 10, 15 years from now, the life is gone. I mean, that's all there is to it. It just has strip malls, the shopping centers who were required to stay open until 9, well, they're gone away now. And one thing is for sure, whatever we decide, that is going to be a decision that 20 years from now, people can look back and, why did they ever decide that? Why didn't they talk about something else?
Not that we're looking to decide anything tonight, so it's one of those things about looking at some of the possibilities, but that's particularly talking about residential. That's where the parking structure allows for other space to be used for possibly residential there, and I'm going off of what is seeming to be successful at Alameda Station. It's now called Denizen at Alameda, but I don't know where that comes from. But
if we're talking parking structure for like down there by Aspen Grove, I mean, who parks there? They aren't necessarily people from Littleton parking there, that's for sure. Our downtown one, I think, are probably more. Have we ever done a survey on that, Michael, on who parks where?
Yeah, the downtown one is more local residents commuting, but it's primarily commuting because, as Councilman Brinkman pointed out, there's no housing around it, so it's commuter parking lots.
And then at the Aspen Grove one, I presume those aren't primarily Littleton folks.
They are not. That's, as I said, it's coming from the west and the south.
And the reason why I say parking structure is unless somebody has a miracle to give back the federal dollars that went into it, there's 1,200 parking spaces that are set. So that's why I talk about a parking structure to handle that commitment. And then you can do with the other space something that's going to be beneficial to the retail folks that are around. And retail includes restaurants as well as shops. For me. Yeah, Bruce.
I was going to say, we had, and again, part of it is absolutely the housing issue with TOD. I mean, Mayor Murphy came in and talked about the Villa Italia redevelopment to Belmar and indicated that I think they, if memory serves, and correct me if I remember this inaccurately, but I think he thought, or they thought initially they were going to maybe be a younger demographic, and what they found was they had a more senior demographic that wanted to stay in town but needed, desired some level of activity, didn't want, wanted to downsize, which again is part and parcel, I think, of where we're at in terms of trying to get folks who are aging in place, but desiring to stay in Littleton, which we'd prefer, while at the same time freeing up some of the single-family units to turn over and bring in more younger families, again, with folks that are probably going to spend more from the standpoint of products versus services. I mean, you really want both, and getting folks who might stay in a TOD-oriented kind of development around Mineral with close proximity to the river, close proximity to Aspen Grove, whatever shows up at Ensor, so forth and so on.
C470.
Yeah. I think
There's good connectivity down there.
Yeah, north, south, east, west. I mean, it seems like something that would make a lot of sense. And again, you got to deal with the traffic-related issues, which are part of it as well. But given that it's TOD, in theory, if somebody wants one car instead of two, because they can get to Denver if they want entertainment or dining or sports, if that's where they want to go for it, then they can jump on the light rail and do DCPA or whatever.
He also said that besides being surprised that it was older folks living there, that they didn't have, it turns out they didn't have enough of it. And it weren't folks that were lower income. They were folks that still had money to spend. Yeah,
you're right about that. Yeah, exactly.
Just another piece of that Ensor property is the drainage and the public improvements that have to occur to make that whole thing work. And that also may apply a little bit to the Jersey Barrier and Crusher Fine parking area that really isn't what it should be.
Get me going, Bruce.
So it's got to get somewhere. And so anyone looking at those has to undo some things to do some things.
Mm-hmm. But with that, if we remember the conversation, was it with CDOT, that in how many years we're going to have a jillion cars on going and coming up and down, and they'll have to take a chunk out of there, and it will eventually have an intersection like Bellevue. And I'll tell you,
Hopefully not exactly like Bellevue.
Well,
Yeah.
no, but he said a major kind of cloverleaf thing. If we're looking into the distance, I can't envision too many people wanting to live there. Sorry. No matter how close they are to the river and whatever. I think they'd rather live someplace, get in a smart car or something, go over to the river or bike or do whatever to get to the river. So I think we have to look at the factors, and unless cars get much quieter, we're going to have the same issues we're getting over at Oak Brook with traffic.
A highway noise, yeah.
With a highway noise.
So So you're thinking, I think that's right too, you're thinking smaller density, higher density, but small areas of density instead of like in a big area like a big cloverleaf. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but something along that. I think we just need to really maybe have an even more in-depth discussion of what the options are, and not necessarily in Colorado. Just, there's some real creative things going on in other parts of the country, but I've heard about them, but I haven't visited them. It's the going there and seeing them. When we go to the San Francisco area around Thanksgiving time, I'm going to look at not the bad stuff in that area, but at some of I hope I get to see some of the better stuff they might be doing there, just to see something. Maybe we should all, Michael, can we all afford a tour of the country?
Road trip.
Road trip.
Order the bus.
Yeah.
Yes, Bill.
Oh, and Peggy, you make a good point on some of this, but I've been to two cities lately that have done exactly what you're talking about, the Kansas City and Oklahoma City, where they have wonderful plans that were developed over a reasonable period of time, and they they analyze demand, and you can look at what's been done in other cities about development in key areas that are influenced by a river or a highway or a major shopping center core with a light rail corridor. And there are tendencies that have been shown throughout the country on these different things. And rather than, 7 of us sit around a table and say, gee, this is a really good idea, I think we need to look at a demand-based analysis of what works in different areas based on the supply factors that are in place. And that's the direction I think we ought to go, frankly. And they've, in both of those cities, they've created overlays that indicate what would be most effective and how those mixes work and how the flow works between all those pieces, so that we're proactive in that development instead of reactive in terms of somebody just coming in and saying, I'm going to have this parcel and this is what I'm going to put there. We need to have some guidance there that would lay that out over the longer term.
I wasn't meaning being reactive, but I also wonder if we want to put, how much we want to put there. The more appeal the river corridor has, the more people are using it, sometimes like a highway along there of people, right, using that, but getting people to it rather than having them be right there, so that you still have those vistas, you still have the wildlife, you still have these things that we all love, well, most of us all love.
Stallman not like that?
Right, that's what I heard, so.
Is he the one? You said most of us. Who's the?
He's a financial guy. He never goes outdoors.
Guys, why don't we put a strip mine in there?
Solar farm.
The part if we look out, and you take a look at what are some of the design possibilities. I mean, if you put your parking structure up against whatever the Santa Fe corridor is going to be, it's going to absorb some of that sound that's there. And as far as looking at demand downstream, you have to recognize that the southwest and the southeast lines ultimately are connected along the C470 corridor. So when you start to take a look at where folks can get to, and there's going to be 25 million square feet of commercial that, and most of that's office space that's being zoned in Lone Tree, where are those folks going to be? And it looks pretty attractive to me. So I'm not the demand guy on that, but all I know is, my sneaking suspicion is somebody that's not as keen on some of those other spaces might be pretty keen on being accessible to the park and the river and still be able to get to C470 if they have that one car in the household, but can actually handle the light rail in between wherever they might be in the tech center, Schwab, or who knows.
And actually, the presentation earlier, I think you bring up a good point, because as cities mature over time, I mean, we don't know how those variables are going to go. But that's such a prime piece with the traffic carriers in terms of Santa Fe Mineral and the light rail and a river. I mean, my gosh, it's a palette that you can develop a wonderful subcore of a city. So, this is an important piece.
I think an important piece of this too is our planning commission, our planning board that is inactive. It's been inactive for 2 years, Michael, and they should be very involved with this kind of stuff with our comp plan. They are supposed to be advising us, and they're not doing anything for 2 years. You've heard me say this before. You keep telling me we'll do something, but yet for 2 years, they don't advise us.
Well, in part, that was why it was valuable to put the list together, so we kind of had a little bit of coming off the top of our heads, what we might want to see folks working on. So
That presentation tonight, that was a good presentation, by the way. I thought it's a great way to look forward on things, on how to make decisions.
We have some notes on that. I was going to move on to C, which is taking a look at a little bit of, not entirely the other end of Santa Fe, but Main Street in Santa Fe and Bowles, taking a look at that. Someone edited out my idea of having an overpass on Main Street to Bowles, but
Well, they have the bridge out on Wadsworth, so you can have your bridge there.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Put it.
Maybe able to-
Well, it's not being used there, so
We get that bridge.
I've not seen anyone on that bridge yet.
The thing with that area, though, it's just kind of like the other one, there's a lot of undermining things that have to be done to do the right development there, whatever that right development
You're talking about Wadsworth there?
No, I'm talking right at Riverfront and the Dish and across the street and Bowles and the river. There's just a lot of,
It isn't just go build it.
no, it's right, and it's not just take the old one over. There's a lot that's got to go on there. And again, that takes a special kind of developer, I think, and a special kind of circumstance.
So let me try to frame your conversation a little bit, because you guys, so part of what we were looking for is what did you want staff to focus on? And so I'm going to respond, Councilman, to your comment, because yes, it will take a special developer. It'll take a major negotiation with a national company. But I can tell you a lot of times when those kind of people walk in, they look at me and say, well, what does the city want? And so and to your comment on the downtown, what is our vision? And so of all of these three that you have talked about, I would say that the one that you actually have some time to have that vision is this area, because it will be complex. And so to direct us to work on some type of visioning process, or whatever you want to call it, I think would help. It's something you can give to Dish. It's something you can farm out to developers and say, well, here's what the community's vision is. Does it pencil? I don't know. Will it ever come to fruition? I don't know, because it requires, there is a, can't remember who talked about private property earlier, but this is private property. It's owned, it's occupied, and they're making, I assume, I mean, it's a call center, but they're making money off of it. And as they've told me more than once, they paid pennies on the dollar, and it's a good investment from their perspective. From our perspective as a community, I'm guessing that it is not the highest and best use of that intersection. I don't know what is, but so my point is that I think in kind of focusing this conversation, we can talk about the challenges out there. The mayor opened with what are the kind of problem statements, but I'm also looking for where does council want us to put our energy and direction on this? And these are generally prioritized in what people came in and said, where there was commonalities in the communication that came back around those 10. So redevelop opportunities downtown, a lot of comments around that. The Answer RTD lot, lots of comments around that. And there's, I think virtually everyone said, there's an opportunity at Answer, at least from our perspective.
I would say a couple of things. One, to Jerry's point about the planning commission and planning board. I don't particularly want the planning board to come back and give us recommendations about visioning for the city. That's our job. We've been trying to do it for 4 years, and we're either going to have to say that we are going to sit down and hire a company that can draw out our plan and have a vision of what that property is going to look like, that says we don't have to say we want a Whole Foods here. We can say we want a market, or we think that this piece of land's greatest and best use for our community includes these things. We think that anything close to the river down there at Bowles ought to have these components. We think that anything up by that intersection needs to have these types of amenities. And we need to really just be very clear and very succinct about it, and not be 30,000 feet.
Committal.
Finally, we can maybe get not deep underground, but we could at least get ground level with this, and actually be able to vision that out, so that, because I know that these developers, they do come in and they go, well, what does this, because they don't want to come in and do a bunch of stuff that we're not going to want, because it's going to require rezonings and all of that. So they don't want to have to, which is why Answer is the situation it is. that they don't want to come in and do that. So I think that it's, we need to make those decisions about, are we ready to really put the pedal to the metal, put the
Finally.
hammer down
Yeah.
and make this happen in terms of what we want, whether it ever gets built or not. At least we have set some direction. And part of that, that gets included into, the updated zoning and those types of things. It's all kind of part and parcel because it really is all part of.
So
There are things on those properties right now, including Ensor, that because we have really old codes and really kind of interesting zoning in some places, that there's going to be struggles. So all of it kind of, I don't know which comes first, cart or the horse on some of this, but I think that's all, it really is intertwined. It's more interconnected than separate.
And committing and making a decision.
Absolutely.
And you're right,
we
coming
set
down from
direction.
80,000 and coming down and actually doing it.
We set direction, and then maybe by setting direction, planning has a clear focus as opposed to coming back and telling us what we should do.
Of which they do none.
here's my dream for this north section, which is we have an extension of some of the character of downtown. We have a village that's present. We have eating establishments, entertainment establishments, and retail. And however it gets organized within that, it's something that folks want to go to. It has one of those characters where it faces the river to a big extent, like downtown used to before Santa Fe was put in, and they moved the river west, and it has that kind of character. That's my dream. That's my, if you wanted to say.
Well, my dream is that we have a study session where we talk about this exclusively and specifically, that piece of property. What other piece of property? We're going to talk about Ensor? Oh, no, I'm not coming. Waste of time. What the hell are we going to talk about Ensor? And the whole mineral area, we're doing that station area plan there. So let's wait till that thing comes in. I mean, the one place where if we want to really focus in some vision and some planning, let's Bolton or Princeton, Maine.
And make it happen.
Make it happen.
I'd like to address the planning commission thing because I'm sitting between two people that have different views on it.
No, I don't think so at all.
No, you're saying you want planning commission involved. And I've heard you
Absolutely.
say that
They
council ought
have to
do
be
division.
involved.
We're the direction.
We are, and we can set a direction, but we go as a council to a lot of trouble to appoint talented and committed people to boards and commissions, and they're good. And, we don't have time to do all the work that is necessary to do on these things to have an effective solution. Planning commission or planning board and whatever other boards are appropriate to the situation need to be
Community
heavily
Development
involved.
Department.
Community development as well, to work with them to develop recommendations to us. But for us, for the seven of us to sit around at one study session and vision one development, I think is a little bit out of touch with how long it takes.
We can't do it
the
alone.
work we have to do. And, we need help from them. That's what they're there for.
Well, this is the first step.
Another first step.
Another first step.
All right.
Okay. So you got that on the list? Yes. Okay. D is dealing with a myriad of infrastructure and support and equipment items that's here, as well as trying to deal with congestion. So it's it kind of moves a number of those along that
It's a
list.
lot of budget. It's a lot of money in D.
Well, I think D is intended, as Councilman Beckman has pointed out, to stop kicking the can down the road, if you will, on capital infrastructure needs. And as we've discussed, this budget has a lot of capital expenses in it, and in part of the intent, as Deputy City Manager Mike Broughton and our new Public Works Director Mark Rolfe are going to make the case that we really need to start a community conversation about our capital infrastructure needs and what do we want to do probably in 2016, November of 2016, to address those, because it's not going to come from marijuana tax or any other kind of incremental shift. It's going to come from if we want to do something, it's going to come from most likely some kind of bond action, sales tax increase, property tax increase to fund that bond, and that's not a fait accompli. It's just a statement of kind of where you get that magnitude of revenue. And so this list is here, and this budget and subsequent conversations over the next several months should lead this council in a direction around what do you want to do for that in terms of going to the voters and having that conversation.
And I have been talking about this a lot because I think as I've looked at the budget for a lot of years working on it here and all, we've been a fairly lean and frugal city. I mean, that's the fact. And we had a couple recessionary periods where we cut back even deeper. So you know, we've because of circumstances and because of leadership and kind of a philosophy, we have not gone overboard in too many areas. There are areas we could be critical of, but that's not the general condition. But we're going into, I think, the period where if we do it right by this budget and we can show the public this is a lean budget, but it's prepared to deal with what we know is coming for the next 5 years, because there's some service issues we've just got to deal with. You know, I'll say emergency medical care is clearly one of them because of an aging population, period. You know, we have to begin to do some of those, and people will say, man, you're, you know, exploding in this area. Well, you know, we can justify that, look at it, it makes reasonable, it gives the people the quality of life that they want, but then what keeps falling short is the infrastructure. We're like the school district in a way in that discussion. And the school district has found a way to float bonds in order to build very, very, very specific, defined, and there's a sign in front of every one of the buildings that says, you know, new floor, new roof, you know, very specific. I think this is where we're arriving at, and I think these are all the topics that without something different in our structure, either bonds or taxes, the cost of our operations isn't going to allow us to get to these with the way that maybe we'd all like it to. And if the answer is the public says, we're not interested in taxing or bonding, you guys have to be leaner and meaner, well, then we need to begin to restructure the government. And it'll be next year, you know, I mean. Soon.
Yeah.
You know, it's this budget session leading into next year. We either go for an increase or we don't. I mean, you know, we just have to know what the public wants, but we have to be legitimate and justified, and all those things go into that, in my opinion. And I really got some opinions about streets, you know, or something like that, you know, I mean, what we have to do, so.
Well, and I don't know if anyone has driven much on Denver streets. But right now, I don't think if we have a standard Denver metro winter, I think a lot of the Denver streets are going to be rubble. We're at least in kind of a little bit better position than that from where I sit, but we're not far away in total. And so I know our office is in the tech center, our professional office is in the tech center, and I just know where there's going to be some 3 and 4 foot potholes, and I'm talking deep and wide. So,
and to get to Councilman Beckman's comment, what we're putting forward are the real things. This isn't the sacred cow. You know, we're not threatening to close the library on Sundays because there's not the budget, and we're shifting it here and there. And I think that goes to your comment around building the trust and really telling that story, is that there's none of that frivolous cuts kind of thing in there. These are deferred maintenance projects, and we will do our best to tell that story about what we need for it, and then you guys will provide us some direction about where those priorities are relative to a bonding or whatever direction you want to go, and we'll do some survey work and we'll move down that road. But this is intended to be a real and honest conversation and not kicking it down the road, which I think is the term, kicking the can, that you've used many times. So hopefully we'll demonstrate that.
And to underline what Michael is mentioning, it's making sure we have consensus on the problem statement before we go to a taxing or a bonding.
Just a bit more.
We got to get that problem statement together so that folks understand it. We can get that consensus around it. And this is one of those where if anyone's done their own bicycle ride or walk or stroll, either along the trails or along the streets and the sidewalks in the city, which I do, they understand some of the condition that's out there, and we need to underline it so that we do get a consensus on the problem, and that's the first. Consent on the solution, consensus on the problem. So,
I agree with you, Mr. Beckman, that it's the elephant in the room. We've got to fix that problem, or everything else becomes secondary. We've got to be able to get around the city and provide the services. So ultimately, people will have to make that decision if they want to support some sort of funding issue or cut services dramatically.
Or not.
Or not.
Do any repairs.
Or, yeah, exactly. So, high priority.
okay, and thank you for that. E is, Peggy?
So, based on what you just said, Bill, we've got, I think, to make some priorities on some of that ourselves. Some of it. We don't ask the citizens, you want to lose your car in a crater in the middle of the road. I mean, if we see those problems, we've got to figure out how to prioritize where that money's going. Because I think Susan Thornton called this the city's curb appeal. If we don't have these things fixed, we're going to be having out migration and just having vacant houses, whatever. I've been getting
Well, I think that's
a lot
absolutely
of
true, Peggy,
citizen input on that.
around that. But
to
it's
go to
also,
Denver where it's
it's also making sure that we have a real statement of how and I'll use a euphemism here, deep the problem is. Because it's
And that's what I was saying during the budget. I think this council needs to prioritize those capital, because you guys are talking about the streets, and I will tell you, our built structures, which we have invested lots of our collective money in, are in a substantial state of disrepair, as you guys are cognizant of. And so that's part of that conversation, and it's putting the package together that you feel hits those priorities and is also something that resonates for the general public to say, yeah, we agree with you. So that we will be having those conversations in depth.
okay. Thank you.
Who's going to have those conversations?
This council.
When?
Well, it's going to start with the budget, and then we'll be setting up some study sessions with council as we go through this, because we need to start some of that survey work probably in early of 2016, so that we can, because
I think
to
we
the
need
conversation.
a timeline on this.
Yes, because for Bill's comment earlier, you guys can come up with what you think it is, but we're going to want to do some survey and see, are you more or less likely to vote for those kind of things. And so we'll get a survey company on board as well. And we are already working on that in preparation of council direction.
You mean the direction from us at budget?
Yeah, and beyond. I mean, the
Can
budget.
we give you direction now?
No. Thank you,
Kick in
though.
the can, Michael?
No, I mean, this is D, so number 4 priority for this group, identify this, so, and Councilman Beckman's been kicking the can to me, so we're working on it. Not for tonight, though. Got to keep going. We're on E, update zoning, already talked about it. Know what you feel, Councilman Valdez.
Councilmember Stallman. Bruce.
Well, I think we are having conversations about infrastructure, and we're going to have more in the short run. I went to the South Metro Housing Options Board meeting last week, and I do think we have not been as comprehensive in our approach to having the conversations about housing. Michael sent out the demographic and income profile. I guess that was today, or okay. And I mean, it's massively illustrative. You look at by district where people are in terms of incomes as a percent of population and age as a percent of population. And I mean, I think it speaks to again, the issues of what do we want the housing stock to look like in this community? Do we want it to be essentially a gated community? Or are we willing to have and work to figure out a plan, collaborating with South Metro Housing and whomever, to figure out what attainable housing looks like for people at all levels of the economic spectrum? I mean, traditionally, I think that's where we've been. But we absolutely, for example, have a lot of folks that are seniors who are on some level of fixed income. We know market rents are going up, and if we want that housing stock to turn over, we've got to have a plan, or we have to have a conversation. And I think it's like I talked to somebody on the phone. I mean, it's like we don't have the answer, but if we don't at least have a conversation, we'll never have an answer. And I really think that's another, it's number 5 on this list, but I think it's entirely critical and maybe only a subset below the capital improvements, which at least has been on the radar for a bit here.
This is kind of a mission creep kind of thing for municipalities, I think. And I've said this before, but you're not going to be able to find assistance from the federal government or what comes back through the state, through the counties, for many of the issues that have to do with an aging population. It's going to come back to us, and so we're not going to get it. I mean, Dr. Cog has some things, and but it's going to come back to us to have a plan. To have a plan to have the community healthy and be providing to the changing demographics and all, and so housing is a key part of that plan.
I mean, from my perspective, the market is going to determine a bunch of it. What we can do is help in the zoning with regard some of the supply issues and maybe some of the mix. I've had 3 conversations in the last week with regard construction litigation in other cities and what they're looking to do, and see if the legislature will actually take some action. It actually gets down to one speaker and what she does, not to call out any particular names on that front. So if anyone has any great contacts there and have some holy water for conversions, that would be pretty good. That's my confidence in the next legislative session is pretty low at this point in time. But it's what can we do on that front, and what can we continue to do to keep the stock that we have vibrant? I mean, what the city has done with Michael and his staff relative to permits and improvements and being in a position. But what is really tough is we still have one of the highest per square foot residential rates, whether you're talking rent or ownership, in the metro area. And so it's one of those blessing and bane kind of approach. And so if we don't have options for folks, it's one of those where the market ends up being to some extent distorted, and that's trying to eliminate and alleviate any of the obstacles and pain points that are there is what we need to continue to work on. So that takes care of that.
So we still have the issue of potentially allowing, I'll exaggerate, 8 unrelated people perhaps, all 70, 75 years old or whatever, occupying a very desirable house maybe because children have gone, whatever. So we need to be looking at that, and also the accessory dwelling unit thing that we keep coming back to.
Yeah, and that's included within this is the accessory dwelling units. It's kind of interesting. We were in another community, and they have what is known as wee casas, which is the tiny homes that they've gone to, and if anyone else has a chance, they have development up in Englewood around that. I'm not sure that's an answer for Littleton, but it's an interesting thing to look at on that front.
What are they called?
I call them wee casas, wee meaning tiny.
Okay. I was thinking maybe wiki ups there, but anyway, okay.
Michael?
So let me just say, I think you guys are aware that this has been a direction from the council and something staff's been working on. We lost our planning director, and we have a new planning director who is evaluating that roadmap and will be making a decision here fairly shortly about the process for updating the code, including all the things that you guys are talking about. And once she puts that together and she gets her bearings a little bit more, we'll have a study session similar to what we've been doing with the department updates. So this one, I believe all the components in here are on the to-do list, and we just need to give her some time, and she'll be in front of you with a proposal, an updated proposal.
Thank you. We move on to F. This is taking a look at our support to businesses and being in a place where we are open and welcoming for businesses, and doing what we've done historically to support that, but also to have Littleton continue to be a place for jobs as well.
And on tonight's agenda was an update from the Economic Development Department, but as you heard, Denise is out, so we will reschedule that, and this, I think, will be an opportunity for you to ask her any questions, for her to give you an update and direct us in specific areas if you don't feel like we're hitting those priorities for you.
One of the things I thought was interesting, I was talking to some of the people who work at Tattered Cover, and it is a microcosm of things. This isn't, it's just a small example, but I think it's something for us to think about. A handful of those people have worked for them for years, and when Joyce started branching out, they moved because they wanted to stay working there. Well, a couple of them were at Highlands Ranch. It was a huge inconvenience because they lived in Denver and then they had to drive. But they continued to do it because they loved their job. They were ecstatic when they were moving to Littleton, but not because they loved Littleton, but because they could now take the light rail and walk to work. And so often we think of light rail as getting on the light rail in Littleton to go to work, but it can be used the other way. And so I think in terms of businesses and supporting and employment and those types of things, I think it's an opportunity, that's a plus, that two of our largest business centers, retail centers, are immediately accessible via walking without any additional transportation from our light rails. One of our other large ones with the South Park, and I've talked to them before about this a couple of years ago, and it never really went anywhere, but it may be something we could talk to them about again, is a shuttle from the light rail, and it could even be worked with RTD, because RTD has no bus routes there, but during certain hours, because while it's accessible by bike, most of them don't, right? But I think that those types, that's something to think about just as we kind of look at this stuff, is how we can be an employment draw.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jerry.
Would have recommended help.
Well, the interesting thing, and I don't know if folks remember, the difference between 2000 and 2010 census, I realize it's 5 years old now, but we actually have more folks that commute into Littleton now than we have folks that commute out of Littleton for their jobs. And so it's...
could be part of the aging demographic, too. Just saying.
Glass is half full. Glass is half full.
Well, it's part of the housing cost here, so it's cheaper for them to live elsewhere and then commute here.
You can live anywhere right now.
So we'll get Denise rescheduled.
Right, and in addition to that, just for council, if you're interested in some details, Littleton Business Coalition is meeting later this week, talking about business development along the river corridor. So that's their agenda item. So not only are we having discussions, but also the private sector is having some of their own. So
Is that tomorrow?
Thursday.
Thursday?
No, tomorrow.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. So
tomorrow morning.
okay. Okay,
7:30 St. Patrick's.
yes, next is item G, is discussion in council meetings, RE decisions being made, redesigned format to enhance openness via multimedia, redesign of agendas and improved electronic presentations, improved public outreach, reduction of influence of vocal minority, improved relations between citizens and council, city put city center into the community, or community center into the community, literally and figuratively, neighborhood engagement, better connected neighbors, better informed community of future needs, balancing significant of past needs, council planning sessions, i.e. this one, work plan based on goals and objectives. Bill, Bruce?
The redesigned format, multimedia was the word I was looking for. Just, I know LPS has done this some time ago where they actually have a screen in the boardroom where they show the agenda as it's moving down so that everybody that's sitting in the audience, or presumably, well, they don't videotape or they don't televise, but presumably you could show the agenda, and I think it keeps people on track in terms of where we are, where they are in their agenda vis-a-vis what topics people may be interested in, for example.
Just on the wall or something?
Yeah, it's just, I mean, if the board sits here and the audience sits there, then over on this wall is a big screen that's got their agenda point by point moving down, highlighted whenever they're on that topic. It's an interesting approach to multimedia communication and making sure everybody knows what's going on.
Good, I like that.
And a lot of councils too have monitors at each of the council members' chairs so that we can see audio, the visual stuff a lot better, because the TV in front of us, you cannot see very clearly. And when you look behind you, it's even, for me, it's even worse. So it would be, I don't even know if it could live stream into our laptop.
We can see if we can do that temporarily. The in-screen or in-desk monitor is part of the development of that. We didn't want to spend the money and time in the current dais, but yeah, it's very commonplace in virtually every other council chambers. We're getting there. But I'll see if we can stream it into the iPad or other tools that you guys are using.
Michael, that'd really be helpful, because a lot of times the presentation on the screen is not particularly clear. And sometimes people present things where the print is very small. And then, Peggy, I don't know about from your side, but we're the two outliers on the seating arrangement. And I can't even see the full screen.
Isn't any better from the middle.
Is it? So, you know, that definitely needs to be taken care of. So.
He's working on it.
Yep.
Okay.
Good.
Good. Enough said for the moment on that. Strategic.
No.
Oh, it's not.
There's not enough said yet.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Ms. Britton has the floor.
Please elaborate.
A lot in G talked about community engagement and that type of thing, and then the neighborhood engagement. I would say that I am really proud of the work we've done over the last 3 to 4 years on our neighborhood programs, and I think we have gone leaps and bounds. When we had the gentleman from Longmont come in about 3 to 4 years ago, when he made the presentation, and we actually now have implemented, I mean, he had a 12-year-old program, and we have implemented probably 30 to 40% of that, and it is incredibly successful, and it will only continue to get more successful. The community's embracing it, and staff is embracing it. I love that Mark isn't, we've given one staff person the job, and so I think that my comment there would be just let's continue to support that program and continue to do more of the same. Where I do think
next door,
all the
particular?
neighborhood, the association and everything,
Because I think that's been really.
neighborhood congresses. The one place where I think we fall short all the time, and I think it is not a problem that is specific to Littleton or to this council, it is the community outreach. And I think communities all over, everyone I've ever spoken to from another community, a council member, a staff member, a mayor, it is a challenge because people are really not watching what we're doing. They are, what was it somebody said? They don't have to watch what we're doing. Somebody said, you judge what's going on by what happens, in front of your street or across your front lawn. Was that you? And I think that that's true. And I think that that's good. And I think that it's fine. I love that our community feels comfortable that they're going to have the services they need when they need them, and that they're not worried about the weeds and the minutia of this stuff that we are, which is in part our job. But when we need them, and when we need their voice, and when we need their opinion, and when we need their input, how do we go get it? How do we get into places where they don't have on Channel 8, they're just perusing the Littleton report. Some people don't even really know we have a council, or, I mean, and I don't expect to educate the whole community about everything, but I do think that there are times when we're talking even tonight about the outreach that we need to do on some of these very big, important programs. And we need to hear from our whole community, not from a small group of people who we hear from all the time. While it's valuable input, it's not the public. As Hans said, when people come down and talk to you, they are not the public. They are that person coming and talking to you. So I think it's incumbent upon us to really figure out how do we do that.
So I'm going to mention two things on that. One is Michael's working with Kelly to move the Littleton report to a monthly publication. So that's going to increase, because that's actually the most effective communication that we currently have on an ongoing basis, that 80% of the population reads.
And that's one way to do it, but that's monthly and in the mail.
Yeah, so that's one.
a budget
Right.
question, right?
And then second is when we're looking at the particular issues, as Michael and his staff, I'm going to speak for him a little bit, adopt what we were trained on and what our learning is to recognize the method of engagement can change by the project and the audience. And so as that is embraced by staff, and we can increase our expectations that the appropriate engagement method is going to be used, whether it's going to be an open house or telephone surveys, I mean, whatever it might be. We're going to, we should see something that's going to be more dynamic and rifle shot as opposed to shotgun.
And like I said, this isn't our own problem. This is going on all over the country, in fact. And so, we're not on the 5 o'clock news every night like the feds are. So that's, the federal government, Washington gets all, exactly.
Hey,
But that's
we were
where
on the front
people-
page of the Denver Post.
Yeah. That's where the messaging, so people start to tune out because of that. So how do we, so that's, and I don't know the answers, but I think staff, it really is probably a very, cast a broad net of research.
Let's give them the
and-
second task of coming up with a better mousetrap, because that is a tough one to figure out.
It is.
It is. I mean, even in our neighborhood, which is just over 100 homes, we put out a regular letter and have events. It's amazing how many people are.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
We know they got a copy of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the fundamental problem, and then we'll move on to the next one, is we live in a representative democracy. It works very well overall. You guys do what you are elected to handle. And then periodically, government decides we need to do an update of some master plan, or we need to do something. And you, the collective you or we, call up the community and say, all of a sudden we want you to change from living your life and living in a representative government to come and provide us with this in-depth, specific task of whatever the plan update or plan is. And as you all know, there's a huge amount of depth. That's why I think representative government works well. And you guys are tasked with drilling in, or your planning board or your historic preservation board, but that person who was mowing their lawn and taking their kid to soccer, and now you want them to think about height and depth and density and mass and scale and what the streetscape should look like. That takes education and awareness and kind of that build-up, which, and again, to kind of summarize, that nut hasn't been cracked anywhere in the United States. This is a challenge in what we need to do, and what, to Phil's comment, and we have acknowledged that we need to come up with a new and better mousetrap, if you will, each time, and really look at what's the context of what we're trying to get input on, and what's the best tool or tools and environment to get that input. So certainly hear you, and we're cognizant of it as well. So.
And you're getting a lot of comments back on next door, aren't you?
Yes and no.
Still the same group?
I think we're getting more comments, and from a different demographic to the comments earlier this evening, but it's still a very small, relatively small, and next door is, you still don't have the level of data that you do on Open Littleton, and then Open Littleton is very small data points for the most part. But part of that, I think, comes from you have to register, and you can't. You do with Nextdoor, but it's not validated to the extent that Open Littleton is. So, but we're working on it. It's another variable, another facet where we're getting our data, and we'll continue to plug away. I think a lot of it, it's getting people prepared in advance. So we can't say next Tuesday we're going to hold a public meeting. It's saying in a month we're going to hold a public meeting. Here's some of the background information that you need in order to really understand the context of the question the council has asked us to pose to the community. Because I think, it's like asking me about, how would I run a bank? I don't know. I'd have to think about it, and I'd have to get some information on investments and how the banking industry works. And, it's not the best analogy, but you're asking people to change their context and think about things that they don't normally think about, because we haven't structured our democracy that way. So just acknowledging that it is a challenge, and we're aware of it, and we're constantly thinking of new and better ways to engage the community to get the feedback and input that you all are looking for in order to make the best policy decision possible. Moving on.
Oh, I was going to just mention
No,
one.
you weren't.
Yes, I was.
No, you weren't.
Yes, I am. One of the better mousetrap
I
items.
know who I work for.
Yes.
Thank you.
Is through the National Night Out organizers for the various different community pieces, I've made follow-up offers to get together if they want to have a few families get together or couples get together on that, and that's been working pretty well. It's only happened a couple times so far since August, but it's been one of those where not everyone was able to attend the National Night Out or get a sense of their own audience on that, and they've had some questions, and they've been kind of social. So,
And I think, just to follow up on Debbie's point about the neighborhood programs, if people don't know how to get to them, just go to the city website, littletongov.org, and in the search bar, if you just type in little neighborhood programs, they'll all come up, and they're great explanations of them. So.
But there is a lot of folks, whether they've done it through grants or whatever, that have gotten together. Yesterday, had bouncy castles in the neighborhood that wasn't supported by the city. So
did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I had to take my shoes off, Bill.
What is our next item here?
Okay.
So just on that too, the community block grants that are getting neighborhood groups, neighbors together.
Some of these are happening without that. I'm just saying.
I know, but I'm just saying I've been getting some really good feedback about that. So I'm hoping.
I was trying to give folks a suggestion for the better mousetrap of trying to leverage some of what's already happened. So, good. The next, basically the rest of the items are ones that if folks feel they should comment on, starting with H through R, trying to deal with, as Councilmember Stallman said, our aging demographic and what that's going to mean. Certainly, it's been expressed around the table, as Councilmember Beckman mentioned, that more dollars from the feds is not going to happen. The counties are underfunded. We can continue to try to work with the county to see that services are there, and hopefully with the next change at the county level, they'll actually move from a part-time person dealing with the aging issues to maybe a full-time person. Where Jefferson County's been for a number of years, and it seems to have worked pretty well for them. I is dealing with revitalization, sculptures, and then single destination ethnic foods is mentioned on that list. But I think the revitalization of Littleton Boulevard fits within some of the streetscape component. If anyone feels obligated to comment. The service study and deployment plan for Littleton Fire and Rescue is next. Then the next is taking a look at the intersection of Lake and Prince with the Mayflower moving as a possibility for relocation.
Say again? Looking at where?
Okay.
No.
Lake and
Relocating
Prince.
where?
Lake and Prince.
Mayflower.
It's not moving them to Lake and Prince. That's where they are. So
It's right next to Littleton Cemetery.
I know, it's not
Yeah.
Lake, it's not Lake, it's Prince and, well, yeah, right, it's across from that in.
Across the side of the
street.
graveyard there. Cemetery.
okay. So
Sorry, move us on.
okay. And then I'll just look at L through R, which these have probably been mentioned by one person. If there's anyone feels obligated to expand around those, they're
I
welcome
believe
to.
that R should really be bigger priority.
Mine
Tired
doesn't
of
have,
going to District 3 for my groceries.
mine doesn't have an R.
You got the edited version. That's a little trivia, huh? Which district doesn't have a grocery store?
You have a 7-Eleven.
As I said,
Some people consider it.
Thank you for your participation in that. Just wanted to mention a couple of items that are happening over the next week in case folks didn't see it. Historic Littleton Inc. has their scavenger hunt on Saturday from 11 to 3. As we talked about, the Littleton Business Coalition getting together this next week, talking about development along the South Platte River.
they're getting together tomorrow, this next week.
Yes.
Both of you are correct.
Yes. Then also tomorrow, if folks are looking at something larger, there is a stakeholder meeting at the state capitol around simplifying sales tax, which, since that's a significant item for our revenue.
That'll be an easy one.
And I apologize for allowing some disrespectful behavior at our last council meeting, and we're going to be making some changes with who gets to manage the clock so that Jerry doesn't have to look over my shoulder to
But
remind
that'd be
me.
poking me, but sometimes you poke me anyway.
That by Wendy.
And we'll see about changing the length of time. There's nothing in our protocols that says 4 minutes is required, so thinking about reducing that to 3 minutes, which is in line with even the most gracious other cities. No one's at 4, and taking a look at that, and then we may have some discussion next week after some of our budget discussion on whether to move that within the agenda or limit it within certain segments of the agenda. So be prepared with your thoughts for next week.
Thank you.
And we're adjourned.